The Iron Man, Chapter 5, the final chapter. The Iron Man's challenge. There was no time to be wasted. The Iron Man allowed himself to be taken to pieces, arms, legs, body, head, all separate, so each part could be flown out to Australia in a different airliner. He was too big to be flown out in one piece. At the same time, a ship sailed from China loaded with great iron girders, and another ship sailed from Japan loaded with fuel oil. The Iron Man had ordered these. The girders and the oil and a team of engineers were unloaded on the beach of northern Australia, near the Spaceboat Angel Dragon's neck. Then the Iron Man's parts were loaded at the same spot. The engineers fitted him back together. He stood on the beach and shouted his challenge. "Sit up!" he roared. "Sit up and take notice, you great space lizard!" The Spaceboat Angel Dragon sat up slowly. He had never noticed the fussing of the boats and the aeroplanes down there on the beach near his neck. Now he gazed in surprise at the Iron Man, who seemed very tiny to him, even though his voice was very big. The Iron Man spoke again. "I challenge you," he shouted, "to a test of strength." Test of strength? The Spaceboat Angel Dragon couldn't believe his ears. A tiny creature like the Iron Man challenging to a test of strength? He simply laughed, loud and long. Then he peered down at the Iron Man, while the echo of his laugh was still rolling around the earth. He peered down out of the sky at this little odd thing on the beach, with his even tinier men scuttling around it. "And if I prove myself stronger than you, then you must promise to be my slave," cried the Iron Man. The dragon smiled. The aircraft flew round, watching this amazing conversation. The Spaceboat Angel Dragon and the Iron Man. Ships out at sea watched through telescopes. "And if you don't accept my challenge," shouted the Iron Man, "then you're a miserable, cowardly reptile, not fit to bother with." The Spaceboat Angel Dragon was so astounded that he agreed. Why, he thought this silly little creature had just finished his antics. "I'll just lick him up." So the monster agreed, and he watched to see what the test of strength would be. After all, if he wanted, he could flatten the Iron Man with just one eyelash. The engineers had fastened all the girders together in a strip of a grid, a huge iron bed the size of a house. Under this they had made a steel-lined pit, and now they poured fuel oil into the pit. The Spaceboat Angel Dragon watched. Now they lit the fuel oil, and the flames roared up fiercely through the bars of the grid. And now the Spaceboat Angel Dragon got his first shock. The Iron Man was stretching himself out on his back, on the grid, amongst the flames, his ankles crossed, his hands folded behind his head, just as he were in a bed, while the flames raged under and around him. The monster stared down, and the Iron Man smiled up out the midst of the flames. The flames became fiercer. The grid became red hot. The Iron Man's hair and elbows and toes became red hot. His body first became blue, then black, and then began to glow dully. He was getting red hot. Still he smiled at the monster, and still the flames grew fiercer. And now the Iron Man was entirely red hot. Pretty soon he was almost white hot, and still he smiled. Out of the white hot eyes and with white hot lips, all the time, the Spaceboat Angel Dragon stared down in astonishment. And now the fuel oil was all burned away. Suddenly the flames died, flickered out and went. The white-hot Iron Man stood up, got stiffly off his glowing bed and began to walk to and fro on the sand, cooling. He cooled slowly. He went from white to orange, from orange to red, red to black, and as he walked, coolly swinging his arms. Now at last he spoke to the monster. "If you can't bear to make red hot like me, then you are weaker than I am, and I have won, and you are my slave." The monster began to laugh. "All right," he roared, "build the fire and I'll lie down." He laughed again. He knew the Iron Man couldn't build a fire the size of Australia, but then his laugh stopped. The Iron Man was pointing up to the sun. "There is the fire for you," he shouted. "You go and lie there. Go and lie in the sun until you are red hot." The monster gazed up at the sun. He felt strangely cold, but how could he refuse? "All right," he set off. With his slow giant wingbacks he lifted his immense body off the earth and flew slowly up towards the sun. while the whole earth watched. Slowly he covered the distance, getting smaller and smaller as he went. At last he landed, a ragged black shape sprawled across the sun. Everybody watched, and now they saw the monster begin to glow, blue at first, then red, then orange. Finally his shape was invisible and some blazing white of the sun itself. The monster was white hot on the sun. Then they saw him returning, a blazing shape tearing itself off the sun. This shape became red as it flew. It was writhing and glowing larger. Slowly once more it became the black bat-wing shape of the dragon flying back to the earth, down and down, bigger and bigger, cooling as he came, until bump! He landed, this time much more heavily than before, on Australia. He landed so heavily that all over the world bells began to tumble out of the church towers, and birds' eggs were jarred out of their nests. The monster stared down at the Iron Man. But it was hardly the same monster. His horns drooped, his face was wizened and black, his claws were scorch burnt, his crest flopped over limply, and his great ragged holes were burnt into his wings. It had been terrible for him and the fires of the sun, but he had done it, and here he was. The fires of the sun are far, far hotter than any fires on the earth can ever be. "There!" he roared. "I've done it!" The Iron Man nodded, but his answer was to signal the engineers. Once more they poured oil into the trough under the grid. Once more they lit it. Once more the flames roared and the black smoke billowed out into the clear blue. And once more the Iron Man stretched himself out on the grid of the raging furnace. The spacebat Angel Dragon watched in horror. He knew what was meant for him. He would have to go once more to the sun's flames. Now the Iron Man's hair and toes and elbows were red hot. He lay back in the flames, smiling up at the dragon, and his whole body was becoming red hot, then orange, and finally white, like the blazing wire inside an electric bulb. At this point the Iron Man was terribly afraid. For what would happen if the flames went on getting fiercer and fiercer? He would melt. He would melt and drip into the flames like so much treacle, and he would be the end of him. So even though he grinned up at the dragon as though he were enjoying the flames, he was not enjoying them at all, and he was very, very frightened. Even the engineers, who were hiding behind thick asbestos screens over a mile away from the beach, felt the hair singeing on their heads, and they thought too it was the end of the Iron Man. Perhaps they'd poured in just a bit too much of fuel oil. But at that moment, and the very second that the edge of the Iron Man's ear started to melt, the fuel was used up and the flames died. The engineers came running down the beach. They saw the red-hot Iron Man getting off his fearful bed, and they saw him moving to and fro in the sand, cooling off. At last the Iron Man looked up at the dragon. He could hardly speak after his ordeals in the flame. Instead he simply pointed towards the sun and jabbed his finger as he gazed at the monster. "That's twice," he managed to say. "Now it's your turn." The monster did not laugh. He set up from the earth, beating his colossal wings, writhing his long, ponderous body up to the sky towards the sun. Now it was his turn. He did not laugh. Last time had been too dreadful, but he went. He couldn't let the Iron Man win. He couldn't let the Iron Man of the earth beat him in this terrible contest. And so all the telescopes and cameras of the world watched him flying into the sun. They saw him land among the flames as before. As before, they saw the great ragged shape like an ink blot sprawled over the centre of the sun. They saw him begin to glow red, then orange, and at last they could see him no longer. He and the sun were one blinding whiteness. He had done it again. But what was the sun burning him up? Had he melted in the sun? Where was he? No. Here he was. He came, slowly, slowly through the space, much slower than before, his white-hot body cooling slowly to red as it came. Then, as he grew larger, coming nearer, he finally became once more black, and the black shape flagged its way down through space until bump! Heavier than ever, he landed on Australia. This time the bump was so heavy it knocked down certain skyscrapers, sent tidal waves sweeping into harbours, and threw herds of cows onto their backs. All over the world, anybody who happened to be riding a bicycle at that moment instantly fell off. The spacebat Angel Dragon landed so ponderously because he was exhausted, and now he was a very changed monster. The fires of the sun had worked on him in a way that was awful to see. His wings were only rags of what they used to be. His skin was crisp, and all his fatness had changed by the fires of the sun into precious stones, jewels, emeralds, rubies, turquoises, and substances they had never found on earth. And when he landed with such a jolt, these loads of precious gems burst through the holes, scorching his skin, and scattered onto the Australian desert beneath. But the Iron Man could not allow himself to pity the spacebat Angel Dragon. He signalled the engineers. "Round 3," he shouted, and the engineers began to pour in the oil. But what was this? An enormous woofing sound, a booming, wheezing, sneezing sound. The spacebat Angel Dragon was weeping. If the Iron Man got onto the furnace again, it would mean that he, the monster, would have to take another roasting in the sun, and he could not stand another. "Enough, enough, enough!" he roared. "No, no," replied the Iron Man. "I feel like going on. We've only had 2 each." "It's enough!" cried the dragon. "It's too much. I can't stand another. The fires of the sun are too terrible for me. I submit." "Then I've won," shouted the Iron Man, "because I'm quite ready to roast myself red hot again if you dared. And I've won." "You've won, you've won, you won, and I'm your slave," cried the spacebat Angel Dragon. "I'll do anything you like, but not the sun again." And he plunged his chin into the Pacific to cool it. "Very well," said the Iron Man. "From now on you are the slave of the earth. What can you do?" "Alas," said the spacebat Angel Dragon, "I am useless, utterly useless. All we do in space is fly or make music." "Make music?" said the Iron Man. "How? What sort of music?" "Haven't you heard the music of the spheres?" said the dragon. "It's the music that space makes to itself. All the spirits inside all the stars are singing. I'm a star spirit. I sing too. The music of the spheres is what makes space so peaceful." "Then whatever made you want to eat up the earth?" asked the Iron Man. "If you're so peaceful up there, how did you get so greedy? And cruel ideas?" The dragon was silent for a long time after this question, and at last he said, "It just came over me. I don't know why. It just came over me listening to the battling sounds and the war cries of the earth. I got excited. I want to join in." "Well, you can sing for us instead," said the Iron Man. "It's a long time since anybody here on earth heard any music of the spheres. It might do us all some good." And so it was fixed. The spacebat Angel Dragon was to send his star back into the constellation of Orion, and he was to live inside the moon, and every night he would fly around the earth through the heavens singing. So his fearful shape, slowly swimming through the night sky, didn't frighten people because it was dark, and he couldn't be seen, but the whole world could hear him, a strange, soft music that seemed to fill the whole of space. A deep, weird singing, like millions of voices singing together. Meanwhile, the Iron Man was the world's hero. He was back to his scrapyard, but now everybody in the world sent him a present. Some only sent him a nail, some sent him an old car. One rich man even sent him an ocean liner. He sprawled there in his yard, chewing away with one ear slightly drooped where the white heat of the last roasting had slightly melted it. As he chewed, he hummed in harmony to the singing of his tremendous slave in heaven. But the spacebat angel's singing had the most unexpected effect. Suddenly, the world became peaceful. The singing got inside everybody and made them all peaceful as a starry space, and blissfully above all their early little squabbles. The strange, soft, eerie space music began to alter all the people of the world. They stopped making weapons. The countries began to think how they could live pleasantly along beside each other rather than how to get rid of each other. And all they wanted to do was to have peace, to enjoy the strange, wild, blissful music the giant singer in space. The end. I hope you like the Iron Man.